The rain had been falling since Tuesday, not the kind of rain that washes things clean, the kind that seeps. The kind that gets into the seams of a jacket that wasn't designed for sleeping outside. That finds the gap between a collar and a neck and runs cold fingers down a spine until a man stops feeling anything at all. Marcus Hale had stopped feeling the rain 3 nights ago. He wasn't sure if that was survival or surrender. He suspected it was both. He was 41 years old. He weighed 162 pounds, down from the 210 he had carried through the mountains of Afghanistan, through the black water channels of Iraq, through training evolutions so brutal they had no official names. His boots were good. That was the one thing he had held onto with a ferocity that surprised even himself. Danner Acadias, worn but resolute, still waterproof in the heel. A man who had nothing could still have good boots. His commanding officer, Chief Petty Officer Dale Mercer, had told him that once, 20 years ago, in a different life. The dog was called Rip. Rip was a mixed breed of unclear origin, some German shepherd, some something else entirely. With one ear that stood straight, and one that folded at the tip like a page marked in a book nobody had finished reading. He had appeared 14 months ago outside a Salvation Army in Spokane, thin and matted and absolutely certain that Marcus was his person. Marcus had tried to redirect him. Twice. Rip had simply waited, patient and unblinking, until Marcus accepted the obvious. They had been inseparable since. Marcus fed Rip before he fed himself. That was non-negotiable. That had never once changed. They were moving south along Route 20 when the memory surfaced. It came the way memories always came for Marcus, not as something recalled, but as something felt in the chest first, before the mind had the language for it. A pressure. A compression behind the sternum. Then the image, a gravel driveway, a chain-link fence with Virginia creeper growing thick along the left side. A green mailbox at the end of the lane with the number 417 painted in his father's deliberate, careful hand. His father, Robert Hale, had been deliberate about everything. Deliberate and silent and present in the way that large, still bodies of water are present. You didn't always notice them, but you were always aware of them at the edge of your perception. Robert Hale had died 2 years ago. Marcus had not been there. He had been in a hospital in San Diego, working through the particular darkness that follows a man home from too many deployments, from too many things seen and done, and left unprocessed in the locked rooms of a psyche that had been trained to absorb punishment without complaint. He had found out about his father's death through a letter from a county clerk in Okanogan County. His father had no other family. He had left the house to Marcus. And Marcus, consumed by his own internal wreckage, had never gone. The property was 11 miles east. He knew this the way he knew things now, not from planning, not from maps or cell phones, but from a bone-deep familiarity with this stretch of Washington state that went back to boyhood. He and his father had walked these roads. His father had taught him to read the landscape the way other fathers taught their sons to read a clock. You look at the ridgeline. You look at where the water runs. You look at how the pines grow sparse near the rocky ground and thick near where the moisture collects. The land talks, his father used to say. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it. Marcus hadn't been quiet in a very long time. He turned east at the junction without fully deciding to. Rip moved with him without hesitation, as if he'd known this was always where they were going. The driveway was still there. The Virginia creeper had spread, unmanaged, across the entire left side of the fence and halfway across the top now. A dense wall of green and rust red that had claimed the chain link completely. The mailbox was gone. The post remained, weathered to a pale silver, leaning 3 degrees toward the road. The house beyond it was small. A one-story structure built in 1962 by a man who believed in walls thick enough to keep out both winter and weakness. The siding had faded from the dark green Marcus remembered to something closer to gray, but the lines of it were solid. The roof looked intact. The windows were unbroken. He stood at the end of the drive for a long moment, rain coming down around him in a steady, indifferent curtain. Rip sat beside his left boot and pressed the length of his body gently against Marcus's calf. Just a small pressure, just enough to say, "I am here. We are still here." Marcus exhaled. It sounded like something releasing from a very great depth. He walked up the driveway. The door was locked with a padlock through a hasp that his father had installed himself, a master lock no. 3, the same model his father had used on the equipment shed since Marcus was 8 years old. Marcus stood there looking at it. The key was somewhere, in a county office. In a probate file he had never pursued. He reached up and ran his thumb along the underside of the hasp bracket, feeling the screw heads, feeling the wood beneath. Dry rot had made the wood soft. The screws barely resisted when he applied pressure with his palm. He wasn't breaking in. He was reclaiming. That was the distinction he made quietly to himself. The door swung open. The smell of the interior hit him with a physical force he had not anticipated. It smelled like his father. Like pine oil and old wool, and something faintly metallic that might have been soldering iron and might have been memory itself. Marcus stood in the doorway and did not move for 37 seconds. He counted them without meaning to. Old habit, old training. Give yourself time to assess an environment before you enter it. His father had never known that his son did that. His father had never known a lot of things about what his son had become. Rip slipped past his ankles and moved inside first, nose low, moving in the careful, systematic sweeping pattern that Marcus had never formally taught him, but that Rip had developed on his own, room by room, methodical, pausing at corners. Marcus followed. The kitchen was bare. The wooden table his father had built from a single Douglas fir plank. A table Marcus had eaten every childhood meal at was still there, gray with dust, solid as the day it was made. The cast iron skillet hung on its nail above the range. Marcus reached up and touched the handle without thinking, and something in his throat tightened with a sudden and unexpected violence. He was not a man who cried easily. He was not a man who cried at all most days. But there was something about that skillet, the ordinary, faithful permanence of it, that bypassed every defense he had constructed across a lifetime of deliberately not falling apart. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and breathed through his nose until the moment passed. He moved through the house slowly. The bedroom. The narrow bathroom with the hexagonal tile his father had laid himself. A linen closet that still held 3 folded wool blankets, dry, faintly musty, but intact. Marcus took them all out and set them on the bed. The bed frame was metal, bolted to the wall. The mattress had been removed at some point. He didn't know when or by whom. He would sleep on the frame and the blankets tonight and feel no differently about it than he had about a dozen field positions in worse conditions. He was boiling water on the range. The gas was still connected, still live, which was either a county oversight or a gift from whatever force governed small mercies when he heard Rip. Not barking. Rip almost never barked. It was a different sound. A tight, focused whine repeated twice that Marcus had learned to read as precisely as a language. It meant, "Come here," it means something is here. It means you should see this. Marcus set the pot down and moved to the sound. Rip was in the corner of the utility room, a small space off the kitchen that Marcus's father had used as a combination workshop and storage room. Rip was standing with his nose pressed against the bottom of the east wall, tail moving in a slow, deliberate arc. Not excited, focused. His working posture, which was a different thing entirely from his playing posture, and Marcus knew the difference the way he knew his own heartbeat. He crouched down beside him. The wall there was paneled in the same dark-stained tongue-and groove boards that ran throughout the utility room. Marcus pressed his palm flat against the panel Rip had indicated and knocked lightly. The sound that came back was hollow. He knocked on the panel beside it, solid. He knocked on the one above, solid. He moved his fingers along the edge of the panel Rip had found, pressing lightly, and on the third try he felt the give. A slight spring. A mechanism, simple and homemade, built into the frame. The panel swung inward. Behind it was a safe, not a large safe. A mid-size Mosler, military surplus by the look of it, the paint worn to silver at every edge and corner, the combination dial centered at the top of the door. Marcus knew this safe. He had forgotten he knew it until this exact second. The specific weight of the knowledge dropping back into place inside him like a key into a lock. This safe had lived in his father's office at the Whidbey Island Naval Air Station for most of Marcus's childhood. His father had been a logistics chief, not special operations, not combat forward, but the kind of man who understood that wars run on supply chains and that supply chains run on the kind of quiet, tireless competence that never makes it into any official history. Robert Hale had brought this safe home when he retired. Marcus had been 19. He had been preparing to enlist. He had not cared about the safe. Now he was 41 years old, crouched on the floor of his dead father's utility room with a dog pressed warm against his side, looking at a Mosler safe he hadn't thought about in 22 years. And he understood with a certainty that went straight through him like current through wire that he needed to get it open. The combination. He sat back on his heels and let his mind go still. Not forced stillness, the cultivated kind. The kind that had saved his life in several dark and specific situations that he never spoke about in any context. He let the thoughts come without chasing them. His father's hands, his father's methodical nature, his father's belief in things that were permanent and reliable, his father's birth year 1942, his own birth year 1983, his mother's birth year, she who had left when Marcus was 6 and had not returned, 1951. His father's service number, which Marcus had memorized as a boy for no particular reason, the way boys memorize the things their fathers hold sacred. He reached forward and began to turn the dial. Left to 36, right to 14, left to 7. He had not known he knew the combination until his hands were doing it. He heard the tumblers. Clear and deliberate, like small decisions being made inside a chest cavity. He turned the handle. The door swung open. What was inside the safe was not gold. It was not cash, though there was some. A bundled stack of bills that Marcus did not count immediately. Setting it aside on the floor with the careful attention of a man who had learned not to want things before he fully understood them. It was not jewelry. It was not a weapon, though the safe had held one once. The impression of a handgun case was visible on the lower shelf's foam lining, and the case itself was gone. Removed at some point by his father, for reasons Marcus would never know. What was inside the safe, stacked carefully and rubber-banded in 3 separate groups, was paper, documents, letters, photographs. Marcus sat down cross-legged on the utility room floor and began to read. The first document was a property deed, not for this house. He already knew about this house. For a parcel of land in Chelan County, 47 acres along a tributary of the Columbia, purchased in 1998 in Robert Hale's name. Marcus had been 15 in 1998. He had no memory of his father buying land. He read the deed twice, slowly, his finger tracing the boundary descriptions, the tax parcel number, the notarized signature of his father in that precise, undecorated script. The second document was a bank account statement, a savings account in a credit union in Wenatchee. The name on the account was Marcus T. Hale. The balance as of the last printed statement, dated 18 months ago, which meant his father had been maintaining it, adding to it. Right up until the end, was $214,000. Marcus read the number 3 times. The room was very quiet. The rain had softened outside to something almost gentle. Rip had put his head in Marcus's lap and was lying perfectly still in that way dogs do when they understand that the human beside them is navigating something vast and needs ballast. Marcus placed one hand on Rip's side and felt him breathe. He picked up the letters next. There were 11 of them, in envelopes addressed in his father's hand, each one labeled not with a recipient's name but with a date. He opened the earliest one, dated 2009, when Marcus had been on his 3rd deployment and hadn't written home in 5 months. His father had written to him anyway, not knowing where to send it. Not knowing if Marcus was alive. Writing anyway, into the silence, because it was the only thing a man of his particular constitution could do when the alternative was simply to stop trying to reach his son. The letter was 2 pages. It talked about the property in Chelan County. His father had bought it for Marcus, he explained, because he had a feeling, which was the closest Robert Hale had ever come to the word belief, that Marcus was going to need somewhere to land someday. He wrote about the land the way he used to talk about the landscape on their walks, where the water ran, where the soil was deep, where the south-facing slope would catch enough sun for a structure. He had drawn a small, careful sketch in pencil at the bottom of the 2nd page, showing the rough shape of the parcel and the creek line along the north edge. He wrote at the very end, in a sentence that sat alone with space above and below it, "I know you are somewhere doing hard things. I am not worried about whether you can handle them. I am only waiting for the day you come back and let someone be glad you did." Marcus set the letter down on the concrete floor. He put both hands over his face, not hiding, not suppressing, just containing it for a moment. The sheer, compressed force of a thing that had been true for years and years and years, and that he had never once allowed himself to receive. His father had been glad. His father had been waiting. His father had built him a landing place with the quiet, unhurried hands of a man who expected his son to come home, even when his son had stopped expecting it himself. Rip pushed his nose into the gap between Marcus's wrists and his chin. Marcus lowered his hands and looked at the dog. Rip looked back at him with those dark, unhurried eyes, one ear up, one ear folded, present, unbothered by any of it. Steady in the way that only creatures who live entirely in the current moment can be steady. "Okay," Marcus said. His voice was rough and low. It was the first word he had spoken aloud in 4 days. He read every letter. It took him 2 hours. The rain stopped somewhere in the middle of the 7th one, and the silence that replaced it felt earned, felt intentional, felt like the world giving him room. His father had tracked him, imprecisely but faithfully, through veterans' databases and discharge records, and a single phone call to the VA in 2019 that Robert Hale had notated carefully on a scrap of paper tucked inside the last envelope. The name of a caseworker, a phone number, a note that read, said Marcus enrolled but did not complete. No current address, he is out there somewhere. The note had no additional commentary, no judgment. Just the fact, recorded in the deliberate hand of a man who filed things because he intended to return to them. He had died before he could return to it, but he had left the safe. He had left the combination that Marcus's hands remembered without his mind's permission. He had left the land and the money and the letters, and the small pencil sketch of a creek running along the north edge of a 47-acre parcel in Chelan County that had been sitting in a man's name for 26 years. Waiting. Marcus did not sleep in the house that night with the frantic, overwhelmed energy of a man whose circumstances had just changed. He ate, he had dried provisions in his pack, and he shared them with Rip in the measured, unhurried way they always shared meals. He lay on the metal bed frame under the wool blankets and listened to the silence of the house settle around him. Rip slept against the back of his knees, breathing slowly. He thought about his father. Not the grief of him that had been there for 2 years already, integrated, permanent, a weight he had learned to carry the way you learn to carry a ruck, properly distributed, acknowledged, not denied. He thought about the specific texture of his father's care, how it had never been loud, how it had never been performed, how his father had expressed love the way he expressed everything else, through action, through preparation, through the willingness to do a quiet thing for a long time, without any guarantee of recognition. 47 acres, 26 years. $214,000 accumulated in increments, probably monthly, probably right after whatever bill was paid, the way a serious man builds something serious. The morning came gray and clear. Marcus sat at the Douglas fir table with the bank statement in front of him and the property deed beside it, and his father's last letter, dated 8 months before his death. Which meant he had written it already sick, already knowing, unfolded and smooth beneath his palms. Rip was at the back door, looking through the glass at the yard, at the wet grass and the pine trees and the November sky coming up pale and cold above the ridge. The last letter was the shortest. Just 1 page. His father had written it with the slightly looser script of a hand that had less time and less strength and no remaining interest in preamble. It said, "I never told you enough. I am telling you now, the land is yours, the money is yours, build something, rest first, then build something. There is a creek on the north edge that runs clean year-round, I checked it myself. The soil on the south face is good. You will know what to do with it. You always did know what to do in hard terrain. I am glad I got to watch you grow into someone capable of hard things. I just always hoped the hard things would eventually give you a rest. I think they will now. I think you are due. Your father, Robert." Marcus folded the letter exactly as it had been folded and held it in both hands. Outside, Rip turned from the glass door and looked at him across the kitchen. One ear up, one ear folded. That patient, ancient-eyed certainty. A dog who had pressed his nose against a hollow wall in the dark and said, "Here, come here, something is here." A dog who had been right. Some things find you when you have stopped believing you deserve to be found. Some things were built for you before you knew you needed them, laid down in the earth and in the careful hands of someone who loved you without condition or ceremony. Some things wait. Not passively, actively, with preparation and intention and the kind of stubborn, unannounced devotion that asks nothing back. Marcus set the letter down gently on the table. He stood up. He opened the back door. Rip walked out into the morning without hurry and stood in the wet grass and turned his face up toward the pale sky, nostrils wide, reading whatever the wind carried. Marcus stood beside him. He looked east, toward Chelan County, toward 47 acres along a tributary of the Columbia, toward a south-facing slope and a creek that ran clean year-round, toward something his father had built out of faith and silence, and a love that had never once required an audience. He reached down and rested his hand on Rip's back. The dog was warm and solid and real. The morning was cold and quiet and beginning. That was enough. That was, finally, more than enough.